on. Hello, AC. Nice to see you.
Hi. Hi, I am having some technical difficulties on my end. I will try to do this as best as possible so that I don't cut out. Daka AC, Taino, Arawak, Biamawisa, Uhuti, Hiwayagwa. My name is AC. I am Taino, Arawak. I'm Two Spirit. I'm a chosen culture keeper with my tribe, Hiwayagwa. I'm disabled, I'm differently abled. I've lived with multiple health impairments since birth. My disability has gone from invisible to visible in the past 2 years because I am now a power wheelchair user. My intersections include Two Spirit, Indigenous, transgender, queer, non binary, poor, recently housed, and it's like the bulk of it.
Thank you. And do you want to share a favorite meal or food you've had in pandemic life?
Oh gosh, a lot of traditional foods. I'm feeding myself. I'm feeding a lot of community. So a lot of the foods that we're serving are based on what happens to come in the pandemic food boxes. So I started a series on how to cook what's in your pandemic food box because some of it's food maybe folks haven't seen before or they, are brand new to work in the kitchen. So we give advice under the hashtag share your recipes, not the backstory.
That's great. Sounds very helpful. Thank you for that. Arwen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name's Arwen Bird, and I use she, her pronouns. And yeah, I'm a wheelchair user as well. I have a visible disability. I have used a wheelchair for the past 26 years to get around. So lots of stuff that goes along with that. And I am also queer. I'm married to another woman, and we've been together for about 15 years now. Married legally for 10. And then my favorite, I call it my bachelor lifestyle, where usually when Tanya's out of town, then I just go to the fridge and like scrounge basically. And I can eat all kinds of weird like pickles and I don't know, ice cream and combinations. So I just kind of go and look for food and scrounge. We don't have kids, so I'm mostly just feeding myself, which means I can eat weird stuff and not worry about eating a balanced diet.
I have to admit, I miss eating weird stuff and have yet to eat a bowl of cereal for dinner in front of my child, but if I have a night off, it might happen. I can't see if Courtney made it. Okay. I do not see Courtney, so let's move on to Michelle, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Michelle Madison. I work at National Alliance for Mental Illness of Oregon, or NAMI Oregon, identifies queer, biracial, and I live with PTSD, which has been an invisible disability most of the time, but has been very disabling at times. And I would have to say, Amy's gluten-free microwave burritos have been my go-to, and even when the pandemic ends, I can't see myself giving them up. And so...
I don't know if you know this, but Amy's is going to start having a drive-through in Portland, like actual Amy's restaurant.
Okay, you just made my week, Nancy. Seriously.
I mean, we already have big plans to go there. I don't know where it's going to be, but I heard
I will drive anywhere for that stuff.
Pretty exciting stuff. So, Rep, introduce yourself.
Yes. Hi, my name is Rebel Black, and I use they, them pronouns. My partner does the cooking, so all the meals are easy for me. This week we had this really incredible asparagus salad with a ginger vinaigrette, and it was so good. I would eat it every week. And are we doing our full introductions right now, Nancy?
No, we're going to do that in the next round. So
Great.
that sounds amazing. Yeah, asparagus. Love it. Feels like spring. That's great. So yeah, and then why don't we go ahead and do another round of introduction, and this time you can spend a little longer just talking about how you identify in the you already started doing, most of you, and then just sort of your thoughts on the intersection around your LGBTQ identity and your disability identity and where you see the intersections, how the intersections show up in your life. And why don't we go in reverse, and I'll start with Rebel, if that's okay with you.
Sure. I'm a gender, and my affectional orientation is Sami, which is a reclaimed Creole word meaning broadly same-gender loving. I have a history of mental health diagnosis, bipolar 1 and PTSD, as well as physical disabilities. I've been experiencing disability since I was 11 years old when I had a bike accident, and that began my journey with chronic pain. I had bilateral total hip replacements when I was 32, and I'm an ambulatory wheelchair user. I'm multiracial and have spent a lot of my life houseless or housing insecure, which impact my experiences of queerness and disability. And I think a lot of my friends are disabled and like LGBTQ to SIA plus, and also disabled. And it's very enriching to have that be almost my whole community. And yeah, so I think like in a lot of ways my experience is normalized because of who is my chosen family and who is in my community. And yeah, I founded the Portland Disability Justice Collective in 2019, and it's a mutual aid group by and for disabled folks. And so that's another way that like I think activism is an important part of my queer identity. And yeah, that's probably it.
That's great. Can you tell us a little bit more about that collective?
Yeah, we have a Facebook group and a small email list. We had been doing coffee hours weekly, but my capacity to host them kind of ran out, and so they've been put on hold until we can find a new facilitator. But we had been meeting weekly over Zoom or Google Meet. And we also like worked with the city to distribute $250 gift cards to disabled Portland residents. So we were able to distribute 92 of those, which was really amazing. That's like $23,000. And we worked with the COVID-19 mutual aid group to distribute $50 gift cards to disabled folks. And we also hosted an international conference this past December on disability justice and mutual aid, and we had 8 presenters over 2 days to talk about their experiences and the work that they do.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll be excited to hear more as we keep talking. So Michelle, I'm going to ask you the same question, and also recognize that you're not just representing yourself, but you're a fierce advocate with NAMI. So why don't we go ahead and tell us more about your intersections and how it might show up at your organization.
Oh, thank you. And forgive me, I forgot to include my pronouns when we were all introduced the first time. I used she, her pronouns. So I like to tell people I get paid to agitate for a living at work. So NAMI is, we've been around for a long time, but we've really ramped up the outreach in the last few years with my boss. And we have a resource helpline. where people, it's on a crisis line where people can basically call, and we just try to triage, you know, in the mental health system, and especially if you are looking for culturally specific support, can be really hard to navigate. For me personally, during the last couple of years, I have never been so aware of my privilege, because I basically passed as a straight white woman, even though that is not who I am. And so there are people in my family from, you know, different, who have different racial identities, different queer identities, and I feel like all of us really need to use any kind of privilege we have to speak up for people who cannot. And so that plays into a lot into my work here. And frankly, just sorry, this gets really personal for me. I feel like advocacy is needed more now than ever. You know, things that I think, frankly, got kind of comfortable with, or even like now, I live in this bubble with mental health. I'm really lucky. I can talk about my PTSD here. I can talk about it with my partner, with friends, with my family. And we have a helpline here where we talk to people who sometimes may not have anybody else. And so I think that's where some of our offerings come in. We have support groups, we have education classes, it's free. Everything is peer run. And so if I, as a queer woman, want to go to a support group run by other queer people living with mental health issues, I can go do that. If I'm a family member, I can go do that. So it's sometimes it blurs a lot when you work in this kind of advocacy, because people find out you're working in mental health. It's, you know, they'll share with you things they might not necessarily share with other people, because it's safe. And that's, I think, my goal as a human being. Our goal here as an agency is to be that safe space for people, to be that place where my boss likes to say, you can come and you don't have to explain yourself.
That's great. And for folks who don't know, can you say what NAMI is?
Forgive me. National Alliance on Mental Illness, Oregon State Chapter.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry to say that Courtney will not be joining us today. They had a loss in their family just last night, and so they won't be able to join us today. But sending our love and care for Courtney. Yeah, it's a hard time for a lot of people right now. Arwen, let's do your sort of longer introduction. I know you've done lots of work in the time I've known you, which has been now. So,
yeah. Yeah, well, I'm just so glad and grateful to Bro for like hosting this town hall just around these intersections, because I think for me, when I think about the intersection of disability and queerness, I have always worked alongside people who share those identities. You know, when I worked for worked with the Western Prison Project, what has now become Partnership for Safety and Justice, and helped to bring in the voice of progressive crime survivors into their work. We were mostly queer staff, you know, like these intersections always have existed. And even when I think about, you know, the individual activists that I've worked alongside, people may not identify as disabled, but we're certainly navigating chronic illness, chronic pain. So I would say that they had a disability, but I think it's up for each of us to decide what our identities are. But I just want to celebrate that in the queer community, that there have always been disabled people, and it's been, I don't know, like an honor, not to use that term too loosely, to be able to serve with other people in that way. I've been thinking too about these intersections and realizing I think I tend to identify more with my disability than I do with my queerness. And maybe for the privilege that Michelle, you were talking about of being a white, I do identify as white, you know, I'm white appearing and I identify that way, but then I'm also femme and people don't know that I'm queer. They assume that when I'm out with my partner that she's my caregiver, which we have used frankly in areas where we felt unsafe, that it was like okay if people thought that we weren't together, that she was my caregiver, like, you know, traveling in places where yeah, that's okay. It's an okay assumption for people to make if it lets us just kind of travel through. But as a consequence, then I think that I do tend to identify more around my disability, and it's an interesting juxtaposition. If there's one thing, I realize that the people who are probably listening to this are already aware of their desire to care for people with disabilities and queer people, but I do want to reinforce that. I think that it's a pretty low bar. When I was talking to my partner about what I might share today, I was like, well, I want to help people connect to their will to care about people with disabilities. And she was like, that's a pretty low bar. But I'm like, well, that's like really, if we're heart connected, if we're like really connected to the humanity of the people that we're trying to assist, then that can carry us through. You know, for those of you that are working in organizations where you might face a request for an accommodation, or somebody that needs a physical accommodation, or people that might need extra time or things like that, when you are connected to your will to care, you can find the energy to be able to have those conversations, to carry you through all the planning that is required, because it does require planning, but what you get is full participation. You know, that's the trade-off, is you get all of the great contributions that people with disabilities who also identify as queer can bring to your organizations and places and spaces. So that's like my message for today. Connect with your hearts. Yeah, and then the last thing I want to share is just how excited I am to go. I'm switching gears. I have worked in criminal justice reform and human rights, and most recently in climate adaptation, helping First Nations plan for the way that climate might be affecting their tribes. But I really felt a call to return to direct service. I missed my work with trauma survivors, working directly with people one-on-one to help them. And so I'm going into healthcare in part so I can just continue, like, help to support people on their health journey. And I'm hoping that I can be a provider who also supports people, queer people, people with disabilities in that process. So we need more of that. You know, we just need people who can empathize with our experiences. So
Yeah, for sure. That's great. Thank you, Arwen. And AC, would you like to talk a little more about sort of your intersections and how they're showing up in your life? And it sounds like you're doing lots of interesting work right now.
Sure. I'm just sort of crossing my fingers here that I'm coming through clearly, because I'm getting a lot of static on my end. Feel free to interrupt me. Okay, good. So like I said, my intersections are Two-Spirit, Indigenous, disabled, newly housed, transgender, non-binary, et cetera, et cetera. My pronouns are they, them, if I haven't already said so. I am a community organizer by heart. I am a natural helper, somebody who steps into community with the desire to give back, with the desire to help. I'm somebody who, despite a wide skill set and a lot of experience, both in my career and in volunteering, I'm somebody who would not be hired by any particular agency, because I have a disability that one day I may be able to complete specific tasks, and the next day I would not, and it's not something that I can predict. I have to listen to my body. So that said, I'm also somebody who, as a natural helper, can do things that nonprofits may not necessarily be able to do, that if they don't have the capacity to pivot during crisis, I can be that pivotal point until they can catch up. Because of the restrictions that they have as a nonprofit, I can facilitate those moments in extremely important ways. One of the projects that I am working on, that I've been working on for a number of years, gosh, I think it's been 8 years now, is bringing together transgender Black and Indigenous Two-Spirit artists. We are not likely to be getting our work into galleries. For if we do approach galleries, they want to see something ethnic in our art. You know, if I make art, it's Indigenous art, but sometimes they want to see me paint a I don't know, shirtless man on horseback with feathers blowing in the wind or something, in order to be able to get into their gallery. So there's a lot of challenges that we face as Two-Spirit folks, as transgender folks, as Indigenous, as Black. And my project seeks to bring our groups together to support each other. We do collaborative work together. We do a lot of pushback against that idea that our work must look ethnic. And I don't go into any gallery without, if I get an invite somewhere, I am dragging the rest of my group with me. If my group can't participate, I turn it down. I want everyone to have a chance to have their voices heard, and they can't do that if they're not there to do it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. That really resonates with me. Thinking about like a few people's work, and I feel like this isn't a question we planned for, but I know that in our work at Basic Rights Oregon, and especially working with the trans community, like just getting employment can be such a barrier to life. And and a lot of the work we do through our Fair Workplace project is working with nonprofits, government, businesses, and talking to them about transgender justice and how they can create more welcoming workplaces. But it feels like at the intersection of queer identity, trans identity, and disability, there's all these other barriers, and I imagine with mental health as well. And so I'm not going to go through the whole list, but I would just invite anybody who wants to speak to that question to because I think that people want to put you in a box, AC, and around your artwork even, which feels absurd, right?
It does, and it's not a space in which that only happens. I've had my child's teacher ask her to show her artwork, and she's 6, so she holds up her little sketch drawing to the Zoom box, and the teacher says, "Do you have any Indigenous art?" Well, the 6-year-old didn't understand what she was talking about, and so she just grabs another drawing and holds it up there, and she's like, "No, I want to see Indigenous art." And my daughter had no idea what she was talking about, so she just grabbed another one, and at this point she's looking very puzzled. So it starts really, really young. And when you combine those intersections like you're talking about, it creates sort of this stack of blocks that my wheelchair has to get over in order to be accepted by sometimes nonprofits that are designed to serve my population. So that, some folks might not want to hire me because there's the disability issue and they don't have accessible bathrooms and I can't get into their building, safely and appropriately. And they don't want to get sued. And so they just don't hire folks with disabilities who are using accessibility devices, right? And then they have to be queer friendly. I'm openly transgender. I'm openly Two-Spirit. So as those, intersections come together, it becomes more complicated. So I continue to do my work outside of a paid position. But if you look at the work that I've done over the last year during the pandemic, I could have been, I essentially was doing the work of a time and a half employee. So it's not like I don't have the capacity to do it. Maybe I don't have the capacity to be there at 8 in the morning and stay until 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Maybe I can't show up every single day. Maybe my hours would be different, or I would be, for example, appearing in Zoom for a meeting. Those options didn't exist before the pandemic. Now that the pandemic has happened, suddenly, disabled folks have been screaming for telemed appointments since it was an option. But we were told, no, you have to be in person. Now, because of the pandemic, everything's telemed. And that's frustrating. I'm excited that telemed is here. I'm excited that folks are able to utilize that. I am angry that it wasn't made available to me and to other folks asking for it before the pandemic. I'm excited that meetings are happening for nonprofits and that I'm able to attend things I couldn't attend because of accessibility, that I now can attend. and because it can be done via Skype or Zoom or
Right.
other live broadcast events. And it makes a big difference in my life, and it absolutely benefits communities outside of my intersections to be able to have me there, to hear my voice and to understand those communities that I'm a part of. I don't represent those communities, but I am a part of those communities, and I listen to folks in those communities, and I can give that information back. Last little thing I have to say is the pandemic has given us unexpected gifts. Nobody wanted a pandemic. Nobody wanted people to pass away. Nobody wanted to get sick. But as major organizations began to pivot to rapidly serve folks, places like NAYA, the Native American Youth Community Center, suddenly became one of the biggest food pantries in the state of Oregon. Like, that's a big shift in operations to take your staff and say, everyone, this is what we're doing together. But I'm also seeing nonprofits drop that scarcity model, or at least let go a little bit, not hold on to it so tight, and begin to come together more collaboratively to serve folks. And that in itself, for me, has been the greatest gift of the last year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I've really seen that a lot. And I think that, we're a policy organization that was giving people gift cards for groceries, in 2020, things we've never done before, because the need is so great in the community. So, yeah, I think that pivoting to think about meeting people's basic needs is, something that matters. And, yeah, I really resonated with a lot of what you said, and wondering, too, if other people want to sort of weigh in on the conversation around, employment and barriers to employment that you see.
I can just jump in.
Sure.
One of the things I think about, like AC, when you were speaking as well, is just representation. Like, if we don't have enough representation in the dominant culture, like I was trying to look, and I don't know of any queer disabled, like, popular culture figures, let alone like having other identities intersect. So, we're left with like stereotypes and weird perceptions of what people's abilities are. And I think that even in the most progressive organizations, if they haven't done the research or the work to try to actually connect with people with disabilities or people with different identities, they might be operating from kind of the misinformation that we get from dominant culture about what our abilities are. And so I know I certainly faced that. I tried for a couple of years to work in the environmental movement, and people were surprised that I got outside, or that I could paddle a kayak, or, for me, what feels basic. Yeah, but I think, again, for me, it's like, if they're operating from a dominant cultural perspective that people with disabilities are to be pitied, or wheelchair users, somehow we just always hang out in our houses, like we don't go outside, so then, yeah, I can have compassion for that, but at the same time, that's when, for me, all the folks that are watching this or might hear our voices, to think about representation, to think about even just images of disabled people being outside is good. Just more accurate and positive representation for people with disabilities, I think, will directly translate into employment as well, because I want for people who are hiring or have opportunities to know what we really can offer.
That's great. Thank you, Arwen.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I could add, the kind of peer support you're doing is invaluable. Actually, all of you who've spoken so far, and that for us here at NAMI, we have support groups. We immediately moved them online with COVID. We did not see any drop in participation, and we have found that it does create a lot more access. And even after post-pandemic, we're still going to offer them, because you may be in a very rural area, right, and you can't drive 2 hours to a support group. You may be unable to. I mean, a lot of people have so much anxiety that they can't go out of their house for certain periods of time, but they still need that support. You can still call in. And we right at the beginning, one of the things that we did advocacy wise was make sure that telemedicine was covered by insurance. I mean, there are little loopholes and gaps and things that it's like we constantly have to be on top of here. And I can tell you, working here, that peer support component, and like Arwen was saying, seeing someone like you, that makes a huge difference. And I just wanted to thank everybody for the work you're doing there.
Yeah, it feels like breaking isolation is such an important part of how we stay healthy, especially during this pandemic. And yeah, it's so important. I feel like, there was recently in the past few weeks, like a movie that came out about a queer Muslim man, and I was like, and it's like, I have nothing in common with that character, right? It's like just that little bit of representation is like, yeah, I'm a person in the world, and someone might see something about me or get to know something more about me. And I think it's so important that talk about it and that we're fighting for representation for all of who we are.
And then just the assumptions people make too. And I've had conversations with a lot of other friends who are also biracial, and it's like, you're not white enough for some, you're not white enough for others, you're not, we passed too well for this or that. I mean, it's just, there's all the identity politics I feel like have really come up for people in trauma. I mean, and people, although you have privilege because people think you're straight, or you have privilege because people think you're white, but it's just, I remember like when you're talking about, gravitating to, okay, this is a safe space and people assume, my partner is my caregiver. And that just, honestly, it makes me sad and it makes me angry because no one should feel afraid to be who they are. I mean, and especially right now when mental health is a concern for so many people on top of everything else, that shouldn't be the thing where people get tripped up, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to go off topic here. I will never forget a couple of years ago, I got a phone call from a woman who was looking for help for her teenage son who was having severe depression. And she started out the call and said, okay, I'm looking for help for my teenage son, but one thing, I'm trans and so is he, will you still help us? And it was just like a knife in my heart. I mean, how many times, and I just humbled, right? Because I've never had that experience, let alone to have it so many times. And I've heard about this from friends where you have to start from that baseline of, are you going to discriminate against me? Are you going to tell me I'm not worthy of the most basic help? And it's just everything we stand for here is just inclusion, welcoming everybody. We're with you. We want your voice. That will drive what we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Whew, yeah, I got little tears in my eyes.
I'm just
with that phone call. I think when the expectation is not acceptance, right, and not love, it's really heartbreaking. So sort of on that topic, I'll ask, I'll take anybody's hot take, but maybe start with Rebel. Do you feel like the LGBTQ community is more or less friendly to the disability community than, let's say, the community at large? What do you think?
Well, I would say that I would remind us that disability justice was developed within the context of queer community. Disability justice is a movement building framework, and it was created by queer, transgender, or gender nonconforming disabled Black people and people of color. I've found that BIPOC queer community is much more disability friendly than mainstream or predominantly white LGBTQ communities. But of course, everyone that I know is both disabled. Almost everyone I know is both disabled, queer, two-spirit, or trans. But in terms of the mainstream LGBTQ community, I think there's a similar lack of awareness around disability as in the straight community. Lack of awareness of basic accessibility and access being included as an afterthought, if at all. For example, like lack of ASL interpreters, no closed captioning, venues that aren't wheelchair accessible, lack of consideration of people with chemical injury. all these different things. So, yeah, I think it kind of depends on which queer community we're talking about when it comes to disability awareness.
That's a really good point.
Such a good point. Yeah, I think that's true. AC might want to jump in.
Yes, I think that I learned personally a lot doing advocacy and community building in the Portland transgender community. This is where my awareness of, hey, how about some sign language interpretation for this event? Things that were outside of my reference suddenly took center. And so I agree that there are, like pieces. I don't like to use LGBTQ because we are so much more than just those letters. And we could take those letters and fill a page and then some. So I tend to use the term rainbow community as an attempt to sort of, scoop more folks up kind of thing. But the lack of understanding, the lack of compassion, gets to be more, like I'm more aware of it when I'm outside of the trans community or when I'm outside of the indigenous community. And, if you're not aware of the barriers, then you can't work toward breaking them down. I was quite a few years ago, I don't know, maybe 4 years ago, I went to Q Center and I said, hey, there's one accessibility spot for people to park and you've got a clinic here now. Every time I come, there's no place for me to park and I can't unload because the cars are too close to each other. That executive director at the time was Justin Pavlate, and he said, you know what, we are absolutely working on that, and I encourage you to check in with me once a week and make sure that I'm doing what I need to do to make sure that happens. And I was like, what? Wait, like that was so surprising to me, right? And you know what, that happened, and that happened quickly, and I celebrated it, and it was, the greatest thing. I'm just asking for a place to park so I can get into my doctor. That shouldn't be something that is special or has to be requested. Thankfully, Q Center was on it and they were, working on it. But I can go into other so-called queer spaces and the awareness isn't there. And without that awareness, there's not any sort of
Yeah, thank you, AC. Any other thoughts around from other folks too about that piece? And it sounds like AC, you gave a great example of like some quick accountability, right, for making a change from an organization that so matters. And we need to hold each other accountable, and we need to give space for that, right? Of like, what are we? That it's so easy for these things to get lost if they're not front of mind. So that's a great example of like holding each other accountable and then like doing it and making the necessary change. It feels like, for a lot of us, we have our safe bubbles where we feel like the LGBTQ community is pretty friendly, but what are some barriers you all see, sort of pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, about really being able to engage with community?
I can jump in.
Yeah.
I have run in, I don't know if I find the mainstream queer community to be so friendly. I really resonate with what Rebel and AC have already shared, and Michelle, I see your head nodding at times to things. We're nodding at the same time. For me, it basically reflects dominant culture, the dominant kind of mainstream queer community. And so I feel like at least my experience has been that it's the onus is on me to be able to figure out how to participate in certain activities rather than feeling like the organizations are already doing their due diligence. And, you know, just even simple things like, you know, I see some organizations saying this venue is wheelchair accessible or this, you know, ASL interpretation will be offered, but I don't see that all the time. And it would be really great to see that, because otherwise, particularly for me, house parties are always a stickler. Like, I know organizations host house parties a lot as fundraisers. I can appreciate the need for intimate spaces and how fun that is, but I'm just like, oh, it's a house party, I can't go. Like, it just, like, it, I just immediately, unless I know the person and know that I could get into their house. So, at least for me, that comes back to that when we just were talking about accountability, I want for that to come from a place of caring. Again, like, not, I think we can get into the same trap with disability that we can get into with other identities where people feel guilty, you know, because, you know, stereotypes are that people with disabilities are to be pitied. And then if you're not doing the thing for the person who's in a down position, then you're a bad person, you know, and like, it just like, I don't want people to be operating from that place. I would rather they were operating from a, hey, this is a human being and I want, and these people are humans and I really value their contributions and I want everybody to be able to participate. And so my awareness is greater now. I realize I need more accessible parking spaces. I recognize I need restrooms that everybody can use, like, and I'm doing this from a place of love, because I want to open these spaces, you know. So that for me is where I feel like there's a lot more generative energy there for us as humans to be able to make choices and to make changes than if it's coming from this, like, I'm a guilty person, or, you know, like, ugh,
Right.
get rid of that. So
Yeah. No, that's great. And it made me think too of like the place where I saw like LGBTQ identity and disability identity really come together was around all user restrooms.
Mm.
It's been such a change, right? And so helpful for all sorts of people,
Yeah.
which has been incredible. And there's just more single stall restrooms, which honestly, isn't that what everybody wants?
yes, I call them
Yes.
bathrooms. They're party bathrooms. You can have a party in there. You could have a friend with you. You could change your clothes. You can have your kids. They're party bathrooms.
So we're starting to get some questions from people watching. We have one really specific question for Michelle. Does NAMI Oregon have support groups specifically for LGBTQ teens with mental illness?
So we don't actually have youth programming for youth, but I would say check out Youth Era, and because they are peer-run youth throughout the transition age. So we, at this point, we have for parents, but we don't have youth groups specifically.
Thank you for that. And then I think there's a question from someone who's asking, for someone who is not disabled, for events that do not provide accommodations, is it helpful to request accommodations so that those living with disability do not constantly have to do this? So the ally question, should allies be asking for accommodations?
Can I add to that as an events person?
Sure.
When I'm not during COVID, we just require that everywhere we hold events. We ask ahead of time, what is the access? Do you have this, and this? That's just part of our standard operating procedure, and I would recommend that for everybody.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for that. Rebel, I saw you nodding your head to this question.
Yeah, I would say one thing that came up for us recently was just also that if access won't be provided, to say that as well. So, you know, if somewhere isn't wheelchair accessible, or if there will be fragrances, or if they're not providing an ASL interpreter, to say that so that folks can plan ahead and not try to show up to an event that isn't accessible. But I think, you know, access really comes through relationship building, and, you know, asking in advance about access needs is really important. And it's also good for allies to advocate for disabled folks around basic access needs. Of course, we can never know everyone's access needs without asking.
Yeah, thanks. Other thoughts on the allies asking groups for accommodations, or just like, you know, I think the question's also coming up around like, how can we be helpful?
Nobody should have to ask accommodations, in my opinion. We actually, frankly, had to push back with the city a few years ago. There was construction around our event site, and an engineer had decided that it was okay for our volunteers to have to walk 3/4 of a mile. And I said, no. I said, you can't do that. We have people in wheelchairs. We have people who just can't walk that far. We have people with chronic pain. And we pushed, and we got someone else to push from the city, and they changed it. But we did have to push.
Yeah. I feel like sometimes you can ask for accommodations. So I used to work at Western State Center. We had this annual conference. It was at Reed College. I'll just name names because that's who I am. But, we had this conference that had a lot of people with different abilities and different body sizes. And I was asking for chairs without arms, or to accommodate people of different sizes who chairs with arms are uncomfortable. And they gave us the flimsiest folding chairs that, weigh less than a pound, just the flimsiest. And I was like, how do you think this is going to work? I was just like, this is not an accommodation that makes sense. Or putting a workshop, around access and disability justice in a room with stairs. And I was like, what?
I'm sorry.
That's just like, yeah, it's ridiculous. But like, people are like, well, a wheelchair will fit in the front row. And it's like, no, like, we want all the rows, right? Like, this isn't just about one wheelchair being able to fit in. So I feel like I've struggled with venues too about actually understanding what people need, right? Because it's not always super clear. So what are some things that you think organizations can do to so Rebel, you mentioned stating this is a house party that's, on the second floor, right? Or in a house that has stairs, or really sorry about the coughing. But I've been talking too much. But, what are some other things you think people can do to really think about all the intersections and how they can be most accommodating to the biggest group of folks?
Oh, it looks like we might have lost Nancy. I can start answering that until she gets back into the group. I had recently asked my apartment manager for some rock salt because the snow was coming. They didn't provide it. They told me a maintenance guy would shovel. Maintenance guy didn't shovel. Fire alarm went off in the building. Folks in wheelchairs and walkers could not evacuate because there was ice and snow out the front door. You couldn't get out. So even with that request of accommodation, and I had to fill out a form, by the way, in order to have this accommodation. It's to the point of being ridiculous. So when I wrote a letter to complain, I said, look, I want to know within the next 2 weeks, what disability advocacy groups have you contacted to make sure that you're meeting the basic needs of folks who need to evacuate? And don't take my issue that I was stuck in my apartment unable to get out as, oh, we need to do this thing for AC. No. We have folks in our building with, hearing, sight, physical disabilities, a lot of, wheelchair walkers, that sort of things. Like, there's a wide range of different abilities in our building, and I want everyone to be met. I don't want to get out when a fire alarm is going off and leave my neighbors behind. So yeah, that was like my demand. I want to see this. I want to hear back from you in 2 weeks. I don't expect that you've completed an evacuation plan in that time period, but I do want to hear about who have you contacted. Where are you at in that process? I shouldn't have had to have that conversation. That should have never happened. I should have never been locked in my apartment while fire alarms are going off. It wasn't a real fire, thankfully. Somebody pulled the alarm. But how was I to know that at the time, right? And it was kind of a blessing in disguise because it let us know that there wasn't a plan and that folks could potentially be trapped here and that a plan needs to be made. So whether we're talking about something like an event that we're planning or event that we're going to, all of our spaces need to be safely accessible. And if you think a line of wheelchairs in the front row of an event is your best plan, think about the fire alarm going off and what are you doing then?
Yeah, that's a great point. And also just recognizing how much you have to advocate just for some basic stuff, to be honest, right? Like, it's, I think like with so much around our identities, like it shouldn't take an act of bravery, right? Like, you're a community activist. I think a lot of folks in this call are activists, but like, you shouldn't have to be an activist just to exist in the world, right? You should be able to go about your day and not have to always be fighting for what you need.
Yes, because then we become that angry guy in the wheelchair.
Right. Yeah.
I saw something raised online a couple weeks ago, and it said, if your rights have never been determined by a Supreme Court case, you have not faced true oppression. It's a really good point. People complaining about, oh my God, I'm oppressed, I'm wearing a mask. It's like, no.
Yeah. So we only have 4 minutes left. I want to announce the winner of the tote bag. I happen to know her, Natalia K. O'Brien. It's your time to shine. You're going to get that tote bag in the mail. Thanks for all you do for the queer community. And hope you enjoy your tote bag. And so we just have time for some final thoughts around anything you want to say. I feel like this hour has gone by so fast, and I want to talk to each of you so much more. But yeah, I think your final thoughts, and everybody can have a whole minute. And I'll start with you, Rebel.
Well, I just wanted to go back to something that AC said from a strengths perspective about being able to access so much more community and medical care than before the pandemic. When we've been asking for video appointments or the ability to work from home, and being told that as an accommodation, that's impossible. But now that everyone needs it, it's suddenly a possibility. I've been able to access so many more opportunities and community since being able to stay in my room or being able to do it from bed. And so I'm really grateful that, this situation has come about. Of course, there have been a lot of horrible things that have happened, and, I can't name it all in 1 minute, but that has been one benefit that I really value.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like the world can change so fast when it needs to, right?
Yeah.
And, it's been pretty amazing to see. Michelle?
I would say, as individually and working in an advocacy organization, talk to your legislators. One story can make a difference. I've seen it happen here time and time again. Regardless of what your need is, what your experience is, it really does make an impact. That's honestly how we are doing everything we do here. And I just want to say real quick, because I'm really happy about this. For years, we had gotten complaints about one hospital system and the way they treated transgender patients, and just basically the art of nagging coming in. They've made huge changes. And the reason I believe they did it was because people with lived experience shared with them their stories, and they were really painful. But they said, hey, this is what happened to me. This is what would have made it better. And when you put yourself out there, even though it can be hard and it can be triggering, it really does make it better for the people that come after us. And I just wanted to say thank you to everybody for doing that.
Thank you. I think we all know which hospital system that is. We don't need to say it, but that's great to hear. Arwen?
Well, thanks. This has been great. It's so nice to get to hear your voices. I think a lot of my experience as a person with a disability can be isolating, so it's really nice to be in community like this. Two things that AC's just said made me think of, like, one is as soon as your awareness of an accommodation need exists and you have the power to do something about it, act. Like, shorten the distance between awareness and action. So as soon as you know that rock salt could help alleviate salt, and wheels and ice don't mix, and so put the salt on the ice. Anyway, so that's a very small example. Or if you're a legislator and you can fund something that would be helpful, do it. And then the other thing is just that when I'm aware that accommodation for one person with a disability actually opens all these other doors that we're not aware of. So, for instance, building a ramp to a building obviously helps wheelchair users, but it also helps people who use strollers or have small children, or there are a lot of other ways that you might be think you're doing something for one person, but it actually opens doors for other people. So just to have that awareness as you're going forward.
Thank you. AC, I'm going to let you close us out.
Okay. Yes, I've been to Salem a number of times to talk to our representatives and to let them know that the safety net has gaping holes in it. And I've given them specifics on how to patch those holes. I encourage you to do the same thing, whether you're a person who experiences a disability or not. We need more voices there. I am excited to be putting out a book with my art, and in celebration of that, I will be inviting more Black, transgender, and Indigenous Two-Spirit folks to collaborate with our group. So please feel free to contact me and join us, because art is resistance and our art is advocacy.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And we'll make sure to send out a link so people can see it. Thank you all for joining us this week. I so appreciate your stories and your wisdom. And see you next time. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.